Welcome back, everyone. Hope you grabbed a quick cup of refreshment. Next up is Helvi Salminen, who, as I said in introduction, created the Finnish Information Security Association, amongst many other wonderful elements of her career. Helvi has been presented at 7 COSAC conferences already. So this is the first time we've had the pleasure of seeing her virtually. Helvi, it's over to you. It's all yours.
Thank you, David. Your introduction was so nice and so kind, and I'm very happy to be here. Although it's always a challenge to be presenting in COSAC. So my topic, I have been doing much of administrative and technical work in the company where I'm working, but because there are things that I never can talk about, so I only can talk about methodology or general human topics, and the topic that I chose for today is actually part of the human topics, about imposter syndrome and overconfidence and what they can do to security. Because I think that how we humans do our work is actually very important, what kind of results we produce. And I think David's presentation was a very good introduction. I mean, we can rethink how we are doing. But imposter syndrome and overconfidence are kind of rather basic characteristics of human beings. You are one or the other, or maybe something in between. But let's see what happens. And oops, I hope that I get my presentation. Okay. So first I start with a very short theoretical part. I'll keep it short this time. About the definition. What is an overconfident person? And this is a definition which I found from one website, which is referred here. And it seems that a person who is actually so convinced that he or she is very, very competent and has everything under control. And these people often have excellent verbal skills. And when you are very confident, you actually create the impression that you are also very competent, which of course isn't always the case. And this difference between confidence and competence, I think that it's maybe best explained in the book written by 2 US professors. And there's an illusion of confidence. And actually, when a person is, if you are really confident, you actually start thinking that you know a lot of things and you are capable of doing a lot of things, which you actually cannot do or do them badly. Oops. And then there's the concept of confidence gap. And I'm not saying that very often, but it can happen that a person who is very confident can have a very low level of competence. And of course, most people learn by experience. And when a person who has a high level of competence, actually a very big confidence gap, has very high level of confidence and low level of competence, but starts learning things, the confidence gap becomes smaller, and then how this person's competence is perceived is closer to reality. So this is very shortly introduced. What is an overconfident person? Of course, being confident, there's nothing bad about it, but if you think that if you are an overconfident person, that you think that you can do things which you actually cannot do, in security that can be quite problematic. Some people anyway are annoyed with the concept of overconfidence. I have had some debates about it, but I still insist talking about the concept. Then there's of course the question of imposter syndrome, and I found two different spellings for the word imposter. I chose one of them, so I hope that somebody corrects me if I chose the wrong one. So a person who has an imposter syndrome is actually continuously uncertain of his skills and is kind of afraid of being a fraud. I think that I know something, but I think that people will soon notice that I actually don't know much about it, and they will notice how low my level of skills is. And there are some very, very interesting links. You will get this a copy of this presentation. You can refer to them later on. But I chose actually one picture of those references, which quite well shows how the person perceives himself and what actually is the relationship between this person's and the other person's competencies. And also the person with an imposter syndrome has a confidence gap. And it very often happens that the people who are actually very, let's say, diligent in their work and very much dedicated, they can also suffer from imposter syndrome because they are perfectionists and they feel that whatever they do is never enough. And so the confidence of in one's skills can be very low, even if a person has very high level of skills. But of course, when the person learns more skills, usually it has also a positive impact on the confidence that the person is feeling. So the confidence gap also in this case, if things go in the right direction, can become smaller. But then what are actually the essential differences of an overconfident person and a person who he's suffering from the imposter syndrome? This is a very, let's say, brief list of the characteristics, and you can find many other, let's say, a lot of other information if you are interested. So an overconfident person overestimates his own skills and competence. That's very, very typical, and I think that we all have met this kind of people. And then the person with the imposter syndrome underestimates his own skills and competencies. And an overconfident person usually underestimates the others, thinks that I'm the king or queen. And instead, imposter feeling person overestimates others. The overconfident person usually can jump to conclusions based on too little information. And the other person searches information before making conclusions about it. The overconfident person is a quick decision maker, takes risks, and likes being in center of attention. And then the person suffering from imposter syndrome usually has difficulties in decision making, because when the person feels that he or she is, it's never enough what you know, then of course, do I really have all the information that I need for making this decision? Maybe I should check still this and that of course slows down the decision making process, avoids risks. Because if I take a risk, then everybody will see how incompetent I am, and likes low profile. I'm not going to, let's say, open up myself and tell which one I am, but maybe you will notice that by the end of the presentation. But having this type of characteristics. So what are actually the impacts on human activity in general and especially in security? And of course, now we could continue with a kind of theoretical approach and list a lot of characteristics and discuss them thoroughly. But I think that maybe it's good to look at an interesting example, a kind of scenario. So now it's story time, but this is not a bedtime story. So I think that I sincerely hope that you will be still awake when I stop talking. And so let's start the story. And this is a story about the adventurous survival battle of Seal IoT, a company making security components to IoT devices and systems. And I have taken the kind of classical approach because I have read somewhere that basically there are not so many types of stories that we tell to our children. And the stories are repeated, just slightly changing the persons and some events. And I have recycled a story which I presented in the COSAC 2016 conference with a colleague of mine, Tuija Kohonen. We had great fun when we started digging things about how to do attacks with different techniques, and then we developed a scenario. So I recycled the scenarios part of the presentation, but then what actually happens later, how the things are resolved, that will be totally different. And in this, we are now going to take a journey to the crisis of the Seal IoT company. And our guides will be Oli, who is a very overconfident person, and Dan, who is suffering from imposter syndrome and will always is trying to kind of hide himself, try to be somewhere in the background. And now it's quite interesting to see how these two guys perform. So this company that I'm talking about is manufacturing IoT components, secure components, and also make software for building case-specific network configurations. They have secure cloud-based updates of their products and administration services for IoT infrastructure. And of course, downloadable applications because the components have to be updated, adapted to the changing conditions. Then I'm not going to explain this through, you will see it later, but this is actually showing the premises where this company is working, their headquarters, which has the office part and the secure development and also secure production area, where all these sensitive assets are handled. And it's very strictly controlled how people and goods come in and go out. And of course, lots of other security measures in place and very strict zoning model. And then it's also important to see what kind of environment this company is working. So their office is maybe not, this is not the best choice for location of such activity, but it is there. So they have public roads, they have behind the building, there's a smaller road where bicycles and pedestrians can go. There's a shopping center and high office building on the other side of the public road. And that, of course, this kind of setup, having this kind of neighbors, may bring some surprising effects to the daily life of this security company. Oops. But then everything seemed to be going well, and the manager or the director of this company is Mr. Murphy, and he's very happy because he's just about to make a contract with a new customer, a very, very big contract, and in addition to that, he sees many business opportunities that their technology can support, like intelligent self-driving cars, intelligent homes, refrigerator which actually handles your food logistics, and many, many other applications of the intelligent technology. So Mr. Murphy is so happy and everything seems to be going well. But there's always a but. So it has been a very, let's say, heavy winter with a lot of snow, and it was snowing heavily out of doors. And actually, Mr. Murphy wanted to check how his home systems are working, but there was some slowness in the operations. So not so good, but doesn't seem to impact the business at all. But then somebody knocked on the door of Mr. Murphy and entered the room and came to explain to his boss the monitoring reports from all the different systems that they had. It first seemed to be just some normal noise, but then there had been some strange connection times, remote connection to a server which was not supposed to be connected remotely. And the DLP system logs showed some unauthorized copy attempts, and physical security systems had also had some irregular activity. So a few minutes ago, everything seemed to be working fine, and new business prospects, very good future for the company for improving business and economy and that kind of stuff. And Mr. Murphy no longer smiled, so he was very, very worried. And actually, these technicians' reports were the beginning of a long and exhaustive battle against the forces conducting a sophisticated attack via multiple channels. And whatever I'm saying here, then afterwards, what happened and what this company is, it is pure invention which I have done with my dear colleague. But from now on, what I'm saying is totally my own work, and you cannot blame Tuija for that. She's a very competent person. And here is a very brief summary of the initial symptoms of the crisis. Slowness of controls in Mr. Murphy's home systems, abnormal connection times, remote connection to a system which was not supposed to be connected remotely, copy attempts in DLP logs, and unexplained changes with partial log information in the physical security systems. And I think that we could now check what is. We had the first poll, which was asking about which person of these could be a better problem solver in crisis, Olli or Dan. And do we have the poll answers here? Maybe I just need to navigate to. Okay.
Helvi, it's 100% for Dan.
Yes, I can notice that. And this is quite interesting because I think that in some other audiences the result might be a bit different, but I'm not. Now it's quite interesting because very often they say that among men, overconfidence is more common, and women usually are let's have a more, not everybody, but let's say having the imposter syndrome is more common among women. So can I make any deductions of how many participants of this conference are women and how many are men? Maybe not. So let's go back to the presentation. And now, of course, knowing the situation, having received the technicians' reports, Mr. Murphy is quite worried. Is really kind of saying that, oh, okay, what's this? Is this anyway a noise or a real problem? But I need answers quickly. And we need immediate action. So Mr. Murphy is asking for action from his team. And he's so worried, but he's also a bit paranoid. He doesn't have full trust in his organization. And so but anyway, he decides to call his best experts one by one to discuss the problem, which is now active. And actually, he's then saying, he's giving the same task to them both, but independently of each other. And I have read somewhere it hasn't happened in the company where I'm working, but I've read that it happened in some companies that the management put different teams in competition with one another to resolve problems. And okay, that might in some cases bring some good results, but at least in the case that I have read about, the results were not so good. Brought much inefficiency, but let's see what happens in the SEAL IoT company now. So, sorry, I have forgot. Okay. Oops, I was too quick. So here, actually, first, Mr. Murphy is talking to Olli because he likes Olli. Olli is a very nice guy. He's very confident and always very, very kind and goes to people and to talks. And Olli has always given assurance that he's capable of resolving all kinds of problems, at least many kinds of problems. And Olli says, oh, don't worry, sir. I have already understood what's the real issue here. I'm sure that I can handle this without delay. And then he just goes very quickly. And of course, Mr. J. Murphy is very convinced that Olli will handle it, but he has anyway some doubts. And then he calls Dan. And Dan says, it's complicated. I really need to go through this investigation. And that will take lots of time because I really need to go into all the details. And it may happen that I will not find the root cause. So it really is very, very difficult situation. Dan isn't confident at all that he will be resolving the crisis. But now we just need to follow these two guys because the journey is... the landscape is quite foggy and we really don't know where these guys will be getting, either of them. And let's look at Dan first. So Dan is working really hard, as he always does. and he analyzes all the technical details. It really is necessary to analyze everything in detail. And the evidences are piling up on his desk or on his screen. And he still needs more details because there are certain things which are not explained and needs to investigate more and more. And okay, we have the IDS logs, we have the DLP logs, we have the physical security system logs, we have this and that, but still need to go. And time passes, day 1, day 2, time passes, and in the end we are in day 5. Of course, in reality, this won't happen, but this is more than a dream, it's a nightmare. And what kind of information Dan is analyzing? Mr. Murphy's home network, because some of the problems experienced in the company might have originated from there. And then Dan needs to look at the device logs. And to do that, he had to go to Mr. Murphy's home because certain things just didn't work remotely. The detailed logs of the restricted network. The network had many different segments and with the different security levels, and they all had to be investigated. Of course, the CM systems already, let's say, highlighted some details, but we need to check behind the evident things. The remote connection, the logs of the, of course, also the internet service provider, because there are connections from the outside. Physical security and facility management system, DLP logs, and maybe many others. Oh, quite a lot of work. And Dan is exhausted. And sometimes he feels that I'm almost there, but then new details pop up and then he needs to restart some activity. Then at some point, Mr. Murphy comes to Dan's office and is asking about the investigation, and Dan would just like to hide himself because his boss is coming and he doesn't have a solution yet. But he says, oh, this is more complicated than I expected. I need more time and more time and more time. I have to ask Ollie, says Mr. Murphy, and goes away, leaving the frustrated Dan. Poor Dan. I really feel sorry for him. Almost crying. But what about Ollie? What has Ollie been doing all this time? So, while Dan is collecting and analyzing the technical data, Dan, who is always a nice guy and likes to be with people, so he doesn't care so much about the technical evidences. So he goes to people and tries to get quick answers from other people. And then people tell him lots of things like, oh, there was a network diagram in the customer meeting room area. It's not supposed to be there. So what the hell was it doing there? But then it had disappeared, so I don't know where it ended up. Oh, there's this guy, Peter. He has a stupid toy on his work desk, and he's playing it with it several times a day. He's supposed to be doing development work, but he's just playing with the toy. Oh, my physical access was never configured properly. We have some very valuable material in our vault, and somehow the balance isn't right. That construction site next to us, it's so noisy. And of course, it's very a classical thing, and it happened to us also. They cut one of our cables, and everything stopped working. Bad things. So Ollie went to Mr. Murphy, and he now feels that he has gone to the bottom of things, and he has got an idea that what actually has been the cause of all these events. And he says, we have some servers which do not have enough storage space, and maybe we should buy some additional hard disk or other storage capacity. Some people have used the company systems for their own purposes, and they haven't been authorized to do so. And of course, there was the cable which was cut, but that has been resolved already a long time ago. So I think that we are more or less there. With very little fixes, we can, let's say, bring the situation back to normal. Oh, good work, good work. Do what's necessary to get the systems running, and I think that you have been so efficient, so your bonus is ensured. Very good. But was it actually so easy? Mr. Murphy was quite happy because Olli so confidently explained how to resolve the problem. But actually, there are lots of questions. Were the physical security problems of giving access? Now I can see the chat window, and yes, Olli is finding out quickly what has changed. That's a very good point. We'll come back to that. And of course, I'm on purpose. I have put some extreme examples here to highlight the differences. Very good comments from the audience. And of course, what's the problem at Mr. Murphy's home? What happened to the network diagram? And it seems that actually Olli jumped to conclusions. But then when he's happy, Mr. Murphy is happy, then he decides to go his Dan, who somehow he sees as a friend, but also a type of competitor in the work context. And Olli and Dan start talking. Okay, I resolved the problem. Did you really? How do you explain? I don't know, but did you know about the toy? Yeah, the toy, what do you mean? You know Peter in R&D, and he got the conference lottery. And then Dan is quite annoyed and says that Peter is stupid. And then they continue together and explain what they have done. And actually then they both understand, because anyway, they have different approaches, but they both understand that they have omitted looking at some important aspects. Olli didn't care so much about the hard facts. And based on very few pieces of information, he thought to have the solution. Dan, instead, because he's a kind of introvert perfectionist, he never went to people to discuss how things looked in the practical life of the company's workers. And then actually putting together the information from the two, the picture started to become clear, and these two guys started working together. Oh, I'm seeing the comments, and actually playing with the toy may actually help him relax and think creatively. I think that's a very good point regarding toys, but now we'll soon come to the point where I may put some comment on Todd's comment. So the results of the combined analysis was network diagram had been stolen, somebody had left it in the meeting room area, and somebody who wasn't supposed to have access to the diagram took it. And maybe you used it for some purposes. There was a spying device in the secure office area, which actually was Peter's toy. And then, of course, there had been a denial of service attack to Mr. Murphy's home network. There was a faulty configuration in the router in the shopping center construction area and this company's facility monitoring access. And there was also still something vague in the vault. Yes. And actually, this here is very good discussion in the chat. I would like to have it because actually these two examples, as somebody commented earlier, are quite extreme. We don't find the pure types of overconfident and imposter syndrome suffering person in real life, but people can have more or less features of one of the two. But anyway, like all good stories, we may be coming to a happy end. And here are actually some I noticed that I completely skipped, that there is a second poll, which I actually. Could you, David, check what the poll results are? The second one.
Yes, Helvi. Your poll was, is Mr. Murphy's approach an efficient way to manage the crisis? And the results are 31% yes and 69% no.
Okay. Okay, I'm really glad that you didn't go 100% for either of them. Because this divide et impera, I think it's a very classical approach applied something like more than 2,000 years ago, very successfully by some persons. But I don't know, maybe in this case the results were not so convincing. So I didn't vote, but I personally would have voted for no. Sorry for you who voted for yes, but you certainly have your ideas why yes is a better answer. So anyway, these two guys went to Mr. Murphy and took him the results. And once they had reported to Mr. Murphy, and Mr. Murphy said, "Oh, what a mess," because he already had taken disciplinary actions, and because somebody was not, according to Olli, somebody wasn't behaving well and had been using the company systems improperly, which may not have been the case, so he might have to reverse the disciplinary actions. But then he asks, now they're both of his experts together, that is the problem really resolved? And they both say yes, as well as it can be resolved. Of course, there still remains some uncertainty, but so it requires some observation of the indicators once they have corrected the topics. And of course, Mr. Murphy says, do it. But then so actually, it seems that there is a kind of happy end. First, everything went well. Then there was a terrible crisis. Two types of approaches were tried, and actually the results were achieved when these two kinds of lines of action were put together. But anyway, Mr. Murphy is happy, but now that the end is well, is everything well? Maybe well enough. And like in all good sorry, this is not a bedtime story, but like in all good stories, there's some kind of a lesson to learn. So what was the lesson for Mr. Murphy? And this is that he thought that maybe divide et impera is not a good method for this type of crisis that they had experienced. But anyway, you need to think from different points of view, not just believe the first thing that comes to your mind. You may have to take action based on the first thing. You just have to do something quickly. But then you have to, let's say, step back and look at things also from other points of view. And jumping to conclusions may not, if you do so and take action, it might not be possible to step back and redo something. And confidence doesn't always mean competence. And without any evidence, it's just talking. And encourage and empower rather than command, because he was commanding his two experts, also playing in a bit nasty way with those guys. And what about Ollie? Maybe he has learned that you should think from different points of view, not just take the first thing that comes to your mind. Don't jump to conclusions. Confidence is fine, but maybe it's better to also develop on skills and cooperate with your colleagues, because I think that maybe if those two guys had started working together from the beginning, might have achieved things more efficiently. And what about our Dan? Of course, he also thinks, oh, okay, it's important to think from different points of view, but don't stick to details, and has to develop the capability to distinguish the essential from lots of noise, because lots of details may be irrelevant for resolving a complex problem. And it's good to check details, but trust your competence. And don't be so afraid of what others think about you. And now Dan is a bit more confident and has come out of his imposter feeling cloud. And don't underestimate your skills, and cooperate with your colleagues, because together you achieve more. And this is the happy end of this adventure. And the purpose really was to highlight the differences with these two approaches: overconfidence and imposter syndrome. And I think that in the end you will see how little I know about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helvi. We do have a couple of questions. The first is from Ben Meyer again. Thank you, Ben. Is imposter syndrome and overconfidence related to being introvert and extrovert?
I think that let's say it comes to my mind, and also have found some support in the literature, the references that I have been reading in preparing the presentation. To some extent, yes, but it's not 100% thing. But I think that there are more extrovert persons in the overconfident ones, and introverts are, let's say, more commonly can have the imposter syndrome. But of course, it's also a continuum. It's not just a clear cut.
Okay, thank you. And there's a follow-up to that question from Richard Nealon, whom you know well. Similarly, is it possible to be imposter in one aspect of your life and overconfident in a different aspect?
Certainly is. Certainly is, and I actually know. But for this, it's kind of, it was just to show the differences. But I know that it's possible. But right now, if I don't tell about myself, I don't find any good examples. But let's say, okay, this is kind of joke, don't take it too serious, but I think that I feel to be an imposter when I'm speaking at COSAC, but I feel quite confident in managing cryptographic systems.
Anyone who does not feel imposter syndrome while presenting at COSAC is probably in the wrong place. The audience will soon tell them whether they are qualified or not.
Yes, I have lots of comments in the chat window, which I don't know if they will be available afterwards. I would enjoy reading them, because I couldn't concentrate fully on that.
I understand. They are cleared, but I think we probably maintain a log, and one of the team will whisper in my ear at some point during the rest of the conference and let me know. So I think we can send you the log in any case.
Okay.
Nishanth says, I think this deals with a lot of user behavior analytics, which get tricky a lot of the time. And that's not actually a question, but inviting you to comment on that. The difficulties of behavior analytics and the relationship between behavior analytics and security performance.
I would say that I agree with the comment. I occasionally have difficulty in finding the right words right away because English is not my own language. So
people would say
even that, I'm the only non-English speaking speaker in this conference.
Some people would say I'm not a native English speaker either, Helvi. So I have a follow-up to that actually, which I think I saw Valerie Lyons on the chat window earlier. I'm not sure if she's with us or has a comment. Valerie is part of the team doing the deep dive into diversity at COSAC next month. And you made an assertion in the progress of your presentation that women are more likely to suffer imposter syndrome than men. You also asked, does the result of the poll reflect attendance at COSAC? It is majority male, but I can't give you the exact stats on it. I'm intrigued by the idea that, is there any evidence that links to diversity in other ways, not just gender, but other elements of diversity? And what's behind my question is the assertion that will be made, or one of the assertions that will be made at COSAC next month, is that diverse teams perform better. Just as you said, it's a mixture of the two. Yeah. Are you aware of any metrics or papers that relate overconfidence and imposter syndrome to other diversity demographics?
I think that in the materials that I have read, but I don't just on the spot get in. But I think that it's very it's kind of a common setup because when there is a group of people who are kind of dominant in some contexts, they have the better possibility of being confident and also overconfident, instead of people who are kind of marginal and in the minority might have more difficulties in expressing themselves and being confident. Of course, then they will come to the question of strong minorities and weak majorities and that kind of things, but that becomes a bit too complicated. But I think that there is some, this kind of problematics can be looked also in the more wider diversity context, but don't have exact references at the moment. Didn't have time to dig into all kinds of details. So maybe we'll hear more in COSAC within a bit more than a month. Hope so. Happens.
Okay. Martin Hopkins, you state that people with imposter syndrome are often risk averse. Yes. Do you think that improved psychological safety can effectively reduce this aversion and improve their performance? That's a lot of big words for it, even for me, never mind a non-native English speaker.
I think that it is possible because very often, because a person with imposter syndrome feels kind of insecure and being afraid of being embarrassed in front of others. And then, but if you feel that you are in a kind of friendly environment, that COSAC fortunately is. So I think that it also improves that you can take a risk. Mm-hmm. You can take more risks. So of course, in a controlled manner, not in a stupid way, just jumping into things, but you can just extend your domain a bit easier if you feel psychologically secure. Yes.
Okay, we've got a few other issues coming up in the chat. One from Dave Thomas. I've seen lots of overly confident people adopting the Dunning-Kruger effect. That said, we all have moments just gone off the top of the screen on me. Effectively, that said, we all have moments of imposter syndrome, at judging, being poor at judging our own competence, where we think we're worse than we actually are. And to be, obviously I don't have metrics on it, but I would say most of the most successful people I've ever met suffer from imposter syndrome. Entertainers, for example, going on stage can't quite fathom the idea that the audience is prepared to pay to hear their jokes or their acting. Anyway, we could discuss that later. Todd says, Ollie also seems to suffer from analysis paralysis. Any suggestions to help Ollie speed up?
Maybe have somebody to discuss things with him.
Say again, Helvi?
Maybe to discuss things with him and have somebody to, so that when you are talking to people, and then you can just kind of step out of the, you're not drowning into details because somebody else is asking the question, so you can ask somebody else. I think very, very often cooperating with other people helps. You get different points of view.
As a manager, the role of positive reinforcement, does that have a role to play? That is to highlight the things that the imposter syndrome person actually does well and to provide evidence that they do it well and make the right decisions? To believe more in their decisions, perhaps?
Yeah, that sounds good.
I'm reading the comments as well. Really, it's Julian Proudfoot, really interesting topic, thank you. I think there's a lot of interesting variables and conditions, some of which may include engagement type, consultant versus business as usual staff, subject matter experts versus generalists, etc. And the length of engagement or even duration of a meeting, whereby someone at the start of a meeting or engagement may be more of an imposter until they feel comfortable. Mary's just tagged on leadership guidance as well. Andreas, I'm sorry, I'm starting to read all the things at the same time here. We're so used to people at COSAC just shouting all at once. Todd, I think speeding up should really be linked by Murphy in determining what level of information is sufficient in this situation. And as commented earlier, this depends on how important it is to the organization finding out the root cause. In a scenario where there's an event, one of the comments on the window was, but what if I die while you're investigating? Couldn't I also die while you're trying to decide what approach to take? And I remember, the name is going right out of my head, but I'm sure someone will correct me. Excuse me, the guy at Bellcore years and years and years ago, talking about almost the first ever hacking incident on the telcos. And he's in his office monitoring the network and he knows there's something wrong. So he calls his boss, and his boss looks at the screen that he doesn't understand. And the guy says, what do you want me to do? This seems to be deliberate. Do you want me to watch it and find out what's going on, or do you want me to kill it? To which his boss replied, I don't know, just hang on a minute while I go get my boss. And this conversation repeated all the way up the line until you have a telecommunications engineer in his little tiny office, crammed full of executives, none of whom understand anything that's being presented to them, and none of them are capable of making a decision. Now, in the end, he said, I'm making the decision, and took over. But the delay in a crisis, I think what I'm trying to get to is a phrasing of which personality type is better at making the right decision in a hurry. When we're in a crisis, it's the ability to make a decision that's really valuable, not delaying while the crisis gets worse and worse and worse. And you've got two personality types there, neither one of which fits I make the right decision quickly. Do you have any observation on that?
I think that neither of these extremes would be good in that situation, because the other one doesn't consider all facts and the other gets stuck into details. So I think that the kind of because you need to distinguish what's important in that situation to limit the impact of the crisis. I think that's the first thing to do. First, stop the things from escalating to something even bigger and bigger. And so I think that needs a kind of a determined person. So it's closer, but I think would be a confident but not overconfident person. And then we need guys to analyze then how to make, once you have resolved the really immediate situation, that you stop the things from getting worse. And then when you start correcting, you need the guys who go deeper also into details.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a couple of comments that follow that line.
Yeah.
Stop talking and make a decision is sometimes the lowest risk. Anyway, thank you very much indeed, Helvi. Really appreciate it. I know how difficult it is to talk to a camera with no audience feedback.
No, there is audience feedback.
Well, not quite the level of COSAC audience feedback bombarding you on stage.
But it's a very good virtual implementation of the COSAC feedback, so I appreciate that.
Thanks very much indeed, Helvi. We're going to switch to Glenn. Glenn will be with us in just a couple of minutes. He's going through the green room now. So we'll be with you with Glenn's presentation, final one of the day, in just a couple of minutes.